Hey everybody, welcome to Fiscal Policy Part 3. In this part we talk about deficits, surpluses, and debt. So let's start by defining a government budget. The balance of the budget is tax revenue minus spending, or tax minus G. If your tax revenue is greater than your government spending, then your balance is positive, which we call a surplus. It means you have extra tax dollars you haven't spent. If your tax is less than G, your balance is negative, and we call that a deficit, which is where you're spending more than what you're taxing. The only way to do this is either to tax out of previous savings or to borrow money, which is far more common in my country. So, according to usdebtclock.org, which, by the way, I'm going to put a little commercial in this. It's not paid, but it's pretty cool little tool there. Go check it out. I checked it on December 4th, 2020, and what did I get? I found that federal tax revenue at the time for the year was $3.46 trillion. That's how much money they've collected from the people. Federal spending in the same time was $6.67 trillion. With that information, you could calculate the balance. Tax revenue, $3.46 trillion. Minus spending, $6.67 trillion, is a negative $3.21 trillion budget. The federal deficit, then, is $3.21 trillion. That's how much money we spent this year that we didn't actually have, so we had to borrow it. And there's still a few weeks left. Next concept is our government debt. This is not an academic definition, but what is the debt? It's all your past deficits plus interest minus what you've paid off. It's how much money you owe. So this year we had a $3 trillion deficit. Last year we had a $1 trillion deficit. Add the two together, and between those 2 years you've got $4 trillion of debt. Only the debt counts all deficits minus what you've paid for them. It's the total amount that the government owes. So federal debt, still according to usdebtclock.org, right now is $27.33 trillion. That's the total sum of all past deficits that haven't been paid off yet. And just for fun, that's 128% of our GDP. So this is relevant to fiscal policy because fiscal policy is all about government taxing and spending. Well, a budget is all about taxing and spending. So yeah, let's get to it. Let's start with a recessionary gap and just see what is happening. Remove comment about last video. So if we're in a recessionary gap, we want to increase Y star from Y1 star to Y2 star, which is equal to Y bar. So we want to increase aggregate demand. So we need expansionary policies like increasing government spending and or cutting taxes. That, though, is going to mean deficit spending. We're going to be paying for money we don't have. During recessions, we have less tax revenue anyway. But to increase spending and cut taxes means you're probably going to have to borrow money. Does this lead to endless deficits? Is this why the federal debt is $27 trillion? Short answer, no. Because our stabilization ideas do not lead to endless deficits. Yeah, we'll borrow money during recessions, but what happens during expansionary gaps or inflationary gaps? We're trying to get down to Y star 2, so we want to decrease aggregate demand. We're going to cut spending and or raise taxes. When we do that, it's going to give us a budget surplus. And a surplus is going to be a time where we are bringing in more money than we're spending. So no, we don't have endless deficits. It just depends on which side of the business cycle we're on. It's supposed to cycle between deficit and surplus with every business cycle. That would at least be the stabilization goal. Now, quick disclaimer, in this 55-year time period from 1965 to 2020, there were a total of 5 years with budget surplus. We had a lot more than 5 years above potential GDP. So, what's going on? Is our theory broken? Is it just wrong? Not necessarily. You just need to remember that politics is not economics. A politician has more goals in mind than just short-term economic stabilization. Among those goals could be all kinds of other things, not the least of which is their re-election prospects. During an economic boom, like up here on the right, actively trying to decrease the economy and put a few people out of work is not very popular. Politicians are more prone to do the left side, expansionary policy, because it makes their voters happy. It makes their voters feel rich. They're less likely to do contractionary policy because even though it's responsible during inflationary gaps, it's not popular because it makes people less rich. And that's how you get 5 years of surplus out of the last 55. So next question, should there be an annually balanced budget? Well, let's start by the assumption saying we're balanced when y equals y bar. That's just a starting point. You can change that if you want to. My arguments should still make good sense. So let's start in this recessionary gap. Y is low, so tax revenue is low. We're deficit spending. If you wanted to balance the budget, you'd have to cut government spending or raise taxes. But those are contractionary policies. If you do contractionary policies, that decreases aggregate demand. That decreases GDP. That increases unemployment. That decreases inflation, but it overall is destabilizing the economy. It's pushing us farther from potential output. It's the opposite of stabilization policy. It's destabilization. When we want to have counter-cyclical policy to stabilize an economy, this balanced budget idea pushes us the wrong way in a recessionary gap. Is that true for an inflationary gap too? Well, GDP is high, so tax revenue is high. We have a surplus, which means we need to either raise government spending or cut taxes. Those are expansionary policies. Those will increase aggregate demand, again, pushing us farther away from Y bar. GDP goes up, unemployment goes down, inflation goes up, and we have successfully destabilized our economy by making the business cycle swing even bigger. So, what does this look like if you were to draw a little business cycle? Here's Y bar. Here's the cycle with no budget rule. But when we do a balanced budget requirement, it amplifies the business cycle swings. Maybe it looks more like this: higher peaks and lower troughs. Y star with a balanced budget is less stable than Y star with no balanced budget requirement. That's why we call it destabilizing. It makes things more crazy. And so, that is why most economists say no to annually balanced budget requirements. It's not that we favor endless deficits. We don't. During good times, we want to see surpluses, and during bad times, we want to see deficits, because that's what stabilization would lead us to. The thing is that the business cycle doesn't always follow your annual calendar. It doesn't say, well, new year, new cycle. We want to have the freedom to do expansionary policy during bad times and contractionary policy during good times. And so the result of that is we say no to the balanced budget requirement. Most of us. There are always exceptions. But yeah, I hope that's helpful, you guys. Thanks for watching. Good luck out there, and happy econing.